There is something deeply unsettling about silence, because silence never announces itself. It does not argue. It does not explain. It does not officially leave. It simply arrives quietly. One day the conversations feel normal. The connection feels stable. The emotional rhythm feels predictable. And then slowly, almost invisibly, something changes. Replies take longer. Energy feels thinner. Words become fewer. Nothing dramatic happens. And yet, everything inside you begins to move. You check your phone more often than before. You replay old conversations, searching for hidden meaning. You begin noticing memories that once felt insignificant. And suddenly you realize something strange. The person who is saying less is occupying more space inside your mind. This is the paradox most people never understand. Presence creates comfort, but silence creates psychological gravity. Tonight, we are not talking about manipulation. We are talking about something far deeper, a mechanism built directly into the human nervous system. Why distance increases attention, why absence intensifies emotion, and why the mind becomes obsessed not with what it has lost, but with what it cannot fully understand. Because obsession does not begin with love. It begins with uncertainty. Human beings are unfinished story detectors. Your brain constantly tries to complete emotional patterns. Every interaction you have with another person builds a psychological loop. A greeting begins a loop. A conversation continues it. Emotional closeness strengthens it. And normally, closure ends it. But silence interrupts the loop before completion. And an interrupted emotional loop becomes mentally active. Psychologists discovered something important decades ago. The brain remembers unfinished experiences far longer than finished ones. Not because they mattered more, but because the nervous system keeps trying to resolve them. When someone disappears emotionally without explanation, your mind does not relax. It accelerates. It begins searching. Was it something I said? Did their feelings change? Did I misread everything? Notice carefully, the brain is not chasing the person. It is chasing certainty. And certainty becomes addictive when it is missing. Most people believe attraction grows through emotional intensity. But neuroscience shows something unexpected. Consistency calms attention. Uncertainty sharpens it. When someone is constantly available, your nervous system adapts to their presence. Interaction becomes predictable, and prediction reduces mental effort. But silence breaks prediction instantly. And when prediction breaks, the brain activates survival focus. This is the same mechanism that makes sudden noises impossible to ignore. Your brain treats emotional unpredictability as important information. So attention increases automatically. You do not decide to think about them more. Your nervous system does it for you. And this is the moment where silence quietly transforms into psychological power. Here is where obsession truly begins. Every positive interaction releases small dopamine rewards, messages, laughter, connection. These rewards teach the brain to expect emotional pleasure. But when interaction suddenly decreases, dopamine does not disappear smoothly. It spikes, because the brain believes reward might return at any moment. This is called intermittent reinforcement, the strongest behavioral conditioning pattern known in psychology. It is the same mechanism that keeps gamblers pulling the lever again and again. Not knowing when reward will return makes the brain try harder. So the person checks again, thinks again, remembers again. Silence does not remove emotional investment. It multiplies it. While communication exists, reality limits emotional projection. You see imperfections. You hear ordinary responses. You experience normal human behavior. But silence removes new information. And when information disappears, imagination expands. The brain begins filling missing spaces with emotional stories. Sometimes hopeful, sometimes fearful, but always intense. The silent person becomes psychologically larger than they actually are, because imagination edits reality. It removes flaws, amplifies meaning, and creates emotional mystery. You are no longer reacting to who they are. You are reacting to the version your mind has created. And the mind rarely lets go of something it created itself. Emotion needs contrast to remain alive. Constant closeness dulls emotional awareness. Distance restores sensitivity. When someone becomes less present, the nervous system begins noticing absence. And absence highlights value. Small memories gain importance. Simple moments feel meaningful. Distance reorganizes emotional perception. You begin understanding what someone meant only after space appears. And sometimes, distance does not create feelings. It reveals feelings that were already there but unnoticed. Attraction is not only emotional, it is also directional. The person who feels more uncertainty begins investing more psychological energy. And psychological investment quietly shifts relational power, not through dominance, but through attention, because attention is the real currency of human connection. Whoever occupies more mental space holds more emotional influence, and silence often transfers that influence without a single word spoken. So silence is not empty, it is active. It reorganizes attention, emotion, memory, and desire simultaneously. And this is only the beginning, because what happens next is even deeper. In the next layer, we enter the part most people never recognize: how silence activates attachment wounds, subconscious fear, and emotional imprinting that can turn simple distance into lasting obsession. Because silence does something words rarely do. It removes distraction. When communication exists, emotions stay on the surface. Messages arrive, responses come, reassurance flows back and forth. The nervous system stays regulated because connection feels active. But when silence appears, something deeper begins. The mind turns inward, and inward is where old emotional patterns live. Most people believe their reaction to distance is about the present person. But psychologically, silence rarely activates only the present. It awakens the past. Every human carries an internal attachment map, a silent emotional blueprint formed long before adult relationships ever begin. It is built in childhood moments, when attention was given, when attention disappeared, when closeness felt safe, or when closeness suddenly withdrew. These experiences are stored not as memories, but as emotional expectations. So when someone becomes distant today, the nervous system does not respond logically. It responds historically. The brain whispers, "This feeling is familiar," and suddenly the emotional reaction becomes stronger than the situation itself. You are not only reacting to silence, you are reacting to every silence you have ever experienced. Silence activates the attachment system like an alarm. For an anxious nervous system, distance feels dangerous. Attention becomes hyper-focused. The mind tries to restore connection quickly because uncertainty feels unbearable. Thoughts increase. Checking behavior increases. Emotional sensitivity increases. But here is the paradox. The more the anxious mind moves toward clarity, the more the silence feels powerful, because effort meets absence, and effort without response creates emotional escalation. Meanwhile, another psychological process begins quietly. The brain starts assigning value to what feels emotionally difficult to access. Not consciously, automatically. Humans evolved to pursue what required effort because effort historically meant survival reward. So emotional difficulty becomes subconsciously interpreted as importance. The silent person begins to feel significant, not necessarily because they are more compatible, but because they are harder to emotionally reach. The human brain is uncomfortable with ambiguity. A clear rejection hurts, but it ends the story. Silence does something far more powerful. It leaves possibility alive, and possibility keeps emotional energy active. The mind begins constructing multiple realities. Maybe they are busy. Maybe they are confused. Maybe they still care. Maybe something changed. Each possibility keeps hope partially alive. And partial hope is psychologically stronger than certainty, because certainty allows emotional release. Uncertainty prevents it. So the emotional system stays engaged, waiting for resolution that never fully arrives. This waiting becomes attachment reinforcement. Another hidden process begins during silence. Memory editing. When interaction stops, the brain stops receiving new corrective experiences. So older memories become dominant. But memory is not a recording. It is reconstruction. The mind slowly removes neutral or negative moments and strengthens emotionally meaningful ones. Laughter feels brighter. Connection feels deeper. Moments feel more special than they actually were. The silent person becomes emotionally idealized, and idealization strengthens longing, because now the mind is not missing reality. It is missing a perfected version created internally. Silence creates a rare emotional state where fear and desire merge. Fear asks, "Am I losing this connection?" Desire asks, "How can I bring it back?" When these two emotions activate together, psychological intensity multiplies. The nervous system becomes alert. Attention narrows. Emotional focus sharpens. And this intensity is often misinterpreted as deeper love or attraction. But sometimes, it is simply the brain trying to resolve emotional tension. Silence becomes powerful because it creates emotional movement without physical action. The person experiencing distance does most of the emotional work internally. and internal effort creates stronger attachment than external interaction ever could. There is an important distinction many people miss. Not all silence creates obsession. Chaotic silence creates confusion, but calm silence creates gravity. When distance feels emotionally reactive, it signals instability. But when distance feels grounded, when someone appears emotionally centered even without constant communication, the nervous system interprets it differently. It reads independence, and independence signals emotional security. Humans are naturally drawn toward emotional stability because stability reduces subconscious threat. So calm distance creates curiosity rather than fear. The question shifts from, why are they gone? To, how are they so unaffected? And curiosity is one of the strongest precursors to attraction. At this stage, something subtle happens. The person experiencing silence begins investing more imagination, more thought, more emotional processing. And investment changes perception. We value what we invest in, not always what invests in us. The more mental energy someone spends trying to understand silence, the more psychologically meaningful the silent person becomes. Without realizing it, attachment deepens, not through interaction, but through reflection. So silence does not directly create obsession. It activates deeper emotional systems that were already waiting beneath awareness. Attachment memory, uncertainty loops, idealized imagination, and once these systems awaken, distance stops feeling neutral. It begins feeling magnetic. But the deepest layer is still ahead. Because in the next stage, silence stops being about the other person entirely and becomes about identity, self-worth, and psychological control. And this is where obsession truly forms. At a certain point, silence stops being about communication. It becomes personal, not because anything was clearly said, but because nothing was said at all. And this is where psychology becomes deeper than attraction, because human beings do not only seek connection, they seek confirmation. Confirmation that they mattered. Confirmation that they were understood. Confirmation that their presence left an emotional mark. When silence appears without explanation, that confirmation disappears. And the mind begins asking a dangerous question. What does this say about me? Notice the shift. The focus is no longer on the other person. Turns inward. Am I replaceable? Was I misunderstood? Did I imagine the connection? Silence transforms external uncertainty into internal self-evaluation. And once identity becomes involved, emotional intensity multiplies. Human identity is partially built through reflection. We understand ourselves through how others respond to us. Attention validates existence. Emotional engagement validates significance. So when attention withdraws suddenly, the nervous system experiences something similar to social pain. Brain scans show that emotional rejection activates the same neural regions as physical injury. But silence is even more complex. Rejection gives closure. Silence gives ambiguity. And ambiguity forces the brain to keep searching for meaning. The mind replays moments repeatedly trying to locate the exact point where value might have changed. This replay loop strengthens emotional fixation because repetition deepens neural pathways. The more you think about someone, the more psychologically important they feel. Not because they changed, but because your brain invested energy in understanding them. In relationships, power rarely comes from dominance. It comes from emotional independence. The person who appears less emotionally dependent unconsciously feels more stable. And stability attracts attention. Silence can unintentionally communicate independence. Suggests, I am not controlled by constant reassurance. Even when this is not intentional, the perception alone changes emotional dynamics. The person seeking clarity moves closer psychologically. The silent person appears further away emotionally, and distance creates gravity. Just like planets, the object that moves less often becomes the center others orbit around. This is not manipulation. It is perception shaped by emotional movement. There is a moment where curiosity becomes fixation. It happens quietly. The mind begins filling empty time with imagined conversations. Future scenarios appear. Meaning is assigned to small memories, and emotional energy concentrates around one unresolved connection. At this stage, obsession is not driven by interaction anymore. It is sustained internally. Silence allowed imagination to grow without interruption. And imagination, once emotionally charged, becomes self-reinforcing. You think because you feel because you think, and the loop continues. The human brain is naturally drawn toward incomplete patterns. Mystery creates cognitive tension, and tension demands resolution. But silence rarely provides resolution, so the emotional story remains open. And open stories stay alive longer than finished ones. People often believe they miss the person, but psychologically, they are often attached to the unanswered question. Because questions keep emotion active. Answers allow emotion to rest. Silence does not create obsession because it is powerful. It creates obsession because it activates multiple psychological systems at once. Uncertainty, imagination, attachment memory, identity reflection, emotional investment, all operating simultaneously. And when many emotional systems activate together, the experience feels overwhelming. But the truth is quieter than people expect. Silence does not force attachment. It reveals where attachment already existed. Distance simply removes distraction long enough for feelings to become visible. So the next time silence enters your life, do not rush to fill it with fear. Sometimes silence is not absence. It is exposure. Exposure of emotions that were hidden beneath constant conversation. Exposure of attachment you never fully noticed. And exposure of the simple psychological truth that the mind often chases not what speaks the loudest, but what leaves something unfinished. Because unfinished emotions echo longer than spoken words. Take a slow breath now. Let the insight settle. And if you want to understand the hidden psychology behind attraction, power, and human connection, subscribe to Voxlore Audio, because the next episode may reveal something about human behavior you have felt many times, but never fully understood.